Motorola, Documentum, Rackspace, Intralinks, and a bunch of others through agencies that I worked for earlier in my career, and also a professor of interaction design at the Savannah College of Art and Design in a previous life. So let's just jump right in. This is the question that's been on my mind for a while now. And it's, how do we amplify the value of design investment and thus increase that investment further? And the reason I have this question is that I've been involved in enterprise for quite some time. So that's going to frame a lot of my stuff, and as well as being involved on the product side within that world. And so what I've noticed is that it always feels like design can't meet its potential, that designers always feel a bit hamstrung, and really we're, as a group, you know, distribution is always a bit off, but we are not really hitting the value that we could be if things were done differently. And so I've been framing the problem with this kind of question. How can we add more value to the organizations we work for? So what isn't DesignOps? It's not DevOps for designers. DevOps is a complicated thing that has more to do with infrastructure than it has to do with code. But there's mindsets that could be taken from it, and we'll talk a bit about that today. It's not project management, and it's not delivery, and those are two often roles or activities that are associated with design ops. If you looked up design operations on LinkedIn job board or Indeed, you might end up seeing in fashion design, design operations is really how to get something out the door. And while those are both part of it, because you do need to ship in the end, that's not all that design ops is about. Going back to DevOps. So DevOps is not developer operations. So people can look up what that's all about differently. But the one thing that I do want to talk about is that it is about IT operations built around the goals of continuous integration and continuous delivery as one of its goals, primary goals. And it's an important component of digital transformation. And without developer operations, we probably wouldn't have the surge of things like big data or even lean being so pronounced within organizations. The whole notion of learn quickly is embedded within DevOps' mindset. And the lessons that I've gotten from this, and I've been working in the cloud world, which is where DevOps kind of is rooted in, is that continuous integration and continuous delivery is really important for learning, that there are systems embedded in DevOps for what automation. So it's software used to build and maintain and check the quality of software. So that's getting into the whole machine learning aspect of it in order to create a system that heals itself. Another key principle within DevOps is measure as you go, that you're constantly instrumented to measure, that it's an open process, share, share, share. And that really comes down to not just sharing so people can see it, but sharing ownership is another big piece of that. This next piece is cattle versus pets is a common phrase within the cloud native and DevOps community in terms of kill your darlings is the way that designers talk about it. But in the world of operations, you might have 1,000 servers running, maybe hundreds of thousands if you're like in the Google, Facebook world. And if I just killed off 100 out of 100,000 because they might be a problem later, then I could do that. And that's what it means to sort of have cattle. If you had pets, you would name them and love them and hug them, and you would care too much and you wouldn't be able to do that. And the last bit is that culture matters, that it's not just technology, that you need to have openness, you need to have accountability, and you need to have autonomy in order for the systems to work. And the last part is it's all to build a culture of learning at pace. And that's a goal that I think that many of us have been really leaning towards, if not already doing. So one question that I have coming out of all of that in terms of design operations is, are we, and if not, how can we be plugged into a continuous integration, continuous delivery world that our peers in the engineering world are doing already? What does it mean to be continuously delivering design? How does that even work as a concept without degrading the quality of design itself? And that's another big piece, maintaining the quality. So what is DesignOps, design operations, DevOps? To me, it's the tooling, the lubrication, and the rails that amplify the value of a design team. So it's everything you need, not just technology, but more than that. We'll talk about those pieces that amplify the value that a design team gives to the total host organization. And more importantly, the value it helps create and add more value for that organization's customers and end users. Two related goals for me within design operations is, how can I set up the teams that I lead for success? What do they need to be successful? And the second one is, again, increase the value of your organization's investment in design. Like, what are they investing in? Why are they investing in it? And how do I measure for that? Again, measure as you go is really important, and every component of an organization needs to be measured to know if it's meeting success criteria. So there are the rails. So I'm going to flip the metaphor here a bit. So there are the rails, the things that keep you focused and having direction, values, principles, strategy, or there's the lubrication, things that keep things flowing, human resources, collaborative systems and spaces. I'll throw culture in there at some point as well. And then tooling are the things that keep work happening, that kind of are the tools, but tools need to have some guidance. And one of the big guidance is format interoperability, that it works within new and existing workflows, and that there is a governance in place. Even if it's an autonomous governance, that governance is still in place and well understood by all. So going to the culture question and the value proposition of design within a culture, the largest obstacle to design success is the misalignment of the value proposition that design itself provides an organization. Do you, as a design leader, as a designer, feel that if you asked anyone in your organization what is the value of design, would they be able to give you an answer that you would agree with? And thing that I've discovered by working with many organizations through the Enterprise UX Conference and IxDA is that the answer most likely is no, that very few design teams have taken the time to get the kind of clarity they need across the organization so that everyone understands this is what design is going to provide to the organization in terms of value. And until you have that answer, or at least on the way towards knowing what you want to measure and things like that, all of the rest is going to just keep hitting that wall, no matter what you do. And when we talk about value, these are the answers. It needs to answer this question: why should I come to you? It needs to justify the investment through perceived return. And then it needs to suggest, what can you measure to understand that return? And if it can't do those three things, then most likely you aren't talking about value. You might be talking about something else. So I have these 4 things that are very broad statements because they're going to be interpreted differently in every organization, because every organization has different cultures and values that frame how they're going to value things. But these are the 4 that come to mind repeatedly for me. One is driving understanding and empathy, that it's design's job to create understanding and bring empathy through an organization for its users as well as for its own employees. The second thing is we create clarity. So that might be a little obvious that like we make things clearer visually as well as through information architecture. But through interaction design, we also bring behavioral fit, and that needs to fit the business and that needs to fit the behaviors of our users so that they will feel comfortable using it. The third thing is exploration. I used to call this creativity because to me it's a combination of two types of creative activities or creative mindsets that designers have that differ from other types, which is abductive reasoning as well as associative thinking. So abductive reasoning is the ability to look at a whole and as a future possibility and then derive that possibility as good, right? And evaluate that. So it's based on possible future creation and envisioning strategic possibilities. And the second thing on associative thinking is kind of like putting things next to each other to see what serendipitously happens from that juxtaposition. My favorite example of that is in Austin. We're all about keeping things weird, like our brothers in Portland. And the way it comes out in Austin is it's sort of like this mix of hippie creativity and Texas libertarianism. And how that comes out to me is the question, why not? And my example of that, hey, if I had avocado, ice cream, and garlic, and I put it in a food truck, would that sell? That's exploration. It's that kind of associative thinking that creates those things that we wouldn't think about being connected previously that turn out to be possibly, questionably, in my example, delicious, right, or desirable. And the next thing is envisioning. We use those visual skills and that abductive reasoning that I mentioned as ways to envision goals, to create a vision that tells us what success looks like if we met a strategy. And because of our visual skills and our storytelling skills, we kind of can bring that forward. So these are the tools that we use to create that value. It's not that no one else can do these things, it's just what we do as part of our job, as part of usually what we're tasked with. So storytelling, visual thinking, information presentation, workshops, and then also simulations and prototyping. The next part of this is that design's value is not just about its customers. Design's value is as important to the design of the organization as it is to the design of the products that the organization creates. And you need to be able to apply that value proposition through an organization, not just to the customer. Talked about principles a little bit as one of the Rails components. They tell us really what's good from bad, less so from wrong from right. Or actually they do include wrong from right as well. But what they aren't is they aren't common sense, they aren't your process, and they're not the latest trend. And if you are using those three things as in your principles that you may have, you're probably just distracting yourselves and you could be more focused. What they are your differentiators, your brand voice, and a reflection of your customers' needs. So they're really about your differentiator in the end, that tell you what's wrong or right for your organization, not what's wrong or right in general. So you don't want to have those common sense or universal type things. Organizational structure. If you've worked in an organization as large as Hewlett-Packard or anything like above 50,000 people or even above 15,000 people, you've probably been in a situation where at least once a year, at Hewlett-Packard it was more like once a week, that you're reorging your organization. Why? I've never really understood that. There's some kind of like the accountants from McKinsey get together and say, yeah, we were wrong, and so we're going to try again. The disruption they don't really care about. But your org structure needs to, as a design organization, you need to be focused on how are you going to scale over time. Your organization wants to grow. You need to be ready for that growth. Two, how are you going to transform your organization, not just build it? So as you grow and as you scale, the needs that people have of you are going to change, and you need to be ready to transform as those needs change. So you need to strategize with that. And then finally, there's the cultural issues and values that are in place here. And you need to have those be part of any org structure so that you maintain them. They're almost like the principles of org design in a way. And I try to stay away from specifics in org design because it is so specific to cultures of the organizations that you're embedded in. But if you are not working towards getting your top design leader to be a peer with both engineering and product, or whatever your mapping is for your organization, you're doing it wrong. Because unless you have a peer relationship between engineering, product, and design, you are probably not going to be as valued by that organization, and thus not be able to achieve the value that you can for that organization. So in order to do this work, it requires the whole team across functions. You can't just design your design organization by itself. It needs to fit in and work with the other parts: product management, engineering, marketing, everything else. It needs to be done in that holistic view. It needs to be based on the understanding of that value of design that we spoke about. And it needs to be guided by a roadmap towards a strategic vision. And we'll talk a little bit more about like that. You aren't going to do everything all at once, that you need to do this step by step. And when you think about your design team specifically, it's about balancing the required skills within the moment that you're in, right? Whatever transformative moment you're in right now, you need that skill set. The way you balance skills moving forward as you transform may differ, and that's where sort of the roadmap comes in. But you need to focus on the balancing of those skills. And when it comes to your team, that's where human resources come in. And you need to work with them quite closely, as well as like partner with them, because it's your team. So there's issues of recruitment, onboarding, career path, compensation, benefits, rewards and recognition, as well as development and education. These are all things that human resources are responsible for as an organization, but you need to give them the guidance for how your team needs to relate to these issues. You can't just let them tell you how they do this for the organization. You need to figure out how to work those relationships with human resources to get what you need for your team. In developing your team, again, keeping your skills balanced, you need to move over time from a group of generalists towards specialists as your organization scales. And you need to invest in your people, and they deserve it. And you need them to be invested in. So now, sort of flipping this a little bit into a piece around collaborate. So collaboration is about openness, transparency, instruction, and criticism. You need to have the right tools that are going to increase engagement. People talk to me about like, why is having a Giphy bot so important for Slack to be successful? Your mileage may vary, and it keeps people engaged in the tool, is what we found at one of my organizations that I've worked in. And so it may not work for your organization, but you need to have the right things that keep your people engaged as collaborators. So what tools are doing that? What cultural setups are doing that? You need to have the right spaces to externalize your work. So to collaborate, you need to be moving your work outside of yourself and outside of your team. The more people who can see your work, the better it is for you and your team. And then you need that mindset of contribution, critique, and instruction. Where can I contribute? How can I offer help? Where can I be teaching? And am I open to receiving all of that stuff as well, because it's not just a one-way thing. It needs to be, you need to be open to as a receiver as well as being a transmitter of those things. Collaboration needs to feel natural. All those places where it feels kind of hokey and feels uncomfortable, that's where you need to be thinking about, hey, there's room for improvement here. Because it really should be one of the most fluid parts of your organization, and making sure that collaboration's tooled and workflowed and just architected correctly, I would call out as one of the most important parts of your design operations. But collaboration is not working separately and then all reporting back in the morning each day. That's not collaboration. Collaboration is literally working together. You can't work together all the time. It's about balance, but you need to have those moments where people are working together, whether virtually or physically, but doing that work together. And working together could be asynchronous or synchronous, but you need those spaces to do that. And so this is my space that I keep on Mural. Mural's a tool to use, right? And one of the things that I've done is I've created a template. This is just a broad template for one of the strategic tools that I use called Desired Outcomes. The tool has set up as 3 canvases side by side. Each canvas represents a different persona that you work through, and you go down. It scrolls all the way down vertically, but you keep it vertical so that you can do easy comparison across the way. And just zooming into a single question, you know, you can work with the tool that way, and each box is sort of set up to be an easy drop zone for a post-it note in the virtual tool. This is just one example of how I was using this at HPE. This is another example through how we were putting up all of the stories within a project that we had, and really just trying to prioritize what needed more research in order to increase our confidence. And so the top right is where almost everything fell because we had really low confidence and really high risk. But hopefully your work is getting more distributed, and so you can have decisions made in that way a little bit better. And this is another tool we were looking at, just what are all of the feature functionality within a new product set. This layout we found really useful for helping us organize, and affinitize might be too simple a word. So it was, but it really helped us kind of like channel the conversation with product management. And so this was created by Dylan Wilbanks, who I was working with at the time on this project. But there are other tools that you need. If you're doing creativity, right, you need to really focus on interoperability of formats. I'm all for autonomy and everyone using the tool that they are most comfortable with, but you know, we want to be a little morbid about this. If you get hit by a bus or if you go down sick for weeks at a time, is somebody going to be able to take your work and use it? How would it be for them to take and use that work? Focusing on a single tool or focusing on a format that can be used across tools helps with that situation. Keeping people connected is one thing. Collaboration is a part of that, but this feeling of connectedness is that we're all on the same team, that we're all working together is important. Helps with that engagement that I was alluding to before. You need to enable remote experiences. Even if you're the most co-located team in the world, if you're doing design correctly, there are points where you're just out of the building. At least I hope so, where you're looking outside of yourselves and you're there, or you're homesick and you need to be able to dial in for an important meeting. And then finally, connecting designers to stakeholders and collaborators. You need tools that can be part of their workflow process as much as anything else. Hold on one second. So when it comes to tooling, your biggest blocker, is going to be IT and procurement. They need to be your new future best friends, and you need to get them to be empowering you instead of blocking you. And it takes a lot of work to work with them and to teach them your world, because they're not used to thinking about you that way. They're all about saying no. You need to get them to be all about saying yes and. So it's a big effort, but it's going to be really valuable for you to make that effort. These are just examples of tool chests. I'm not going to go over all of them, but this is sort of a set that we were working towards. Next bit is workflow. So now we're like really deep into that tooling part. So you need to be the connections and the processes that move to go, right? And so it comes down to not just passing things off and getting approvals and not approvals, but how do you create a workflow that's contributing to that continuous delivery and learning that is desired for any organization. And in this, you can't really have workflow work well without governance, decision-making, autonomy, risk management, being sure about security and privacy, being sure that you're not guinea pigging your customers unnecessarily through too much delivery is also an issue of governance. So all of those things need to be traded off, but need to be actually designed. So then talking about the leader of design operations, the role needs to start immediately. If you don't have somebody with this responsibility, you need to add it onto the team. At first, it's probably going to be the head of design, whoever's your highest lead designer, and then it becomes a part-time role of a line manager possibly, and then finally it becomes a full-time position. These are all the things that the role includes and can be doing. It's by no means exhaustive or comprehensive. This is just examples of those types of things that that role is responsible for. Sometimes it's called Director of Design Ops, sometimes it's called a Chief of Staff. But these are some of the things to be thinking about. A design operations lead is a person who's system-oriented, has experience in many different design contexts, and one of his core relationship building skills is that they're an influencer, that they know how to influence people through an organization to get things done. A little bit more deeper into the qualifications, systems, design depth, relationships, and then understanding and alignment, being able to facilitate those things. So you need to wrap it all in a culture. So put a bow on it, basically. Take the culture of learning in DevOps, infuse it with empathy, inclusion, and vision. And that's somewhat of what you need for a culture for design operations or for design value to be met. So some things to think about when you're making it happen: don't boil the ocean. This sounds really big, but you can start off with boiling a little lake or bay, and then the Sound, and then the Gulf, and then maybe you'll get to the Black Sea or the Caspian Sea, and then you can then boil an ocean when you're ready for that. You have to be sure that you're inclusive and you collaborate. You need to drill hard into aligning the value and meaning of your team with the rest of the team. Measure and adjust, and then imagine success and work to make that happen. And that's it.
Great, fantastic, Dave. Thanks so much for that presentation. We got a bunch of questions in, a lot of activity on Twitter as well, too. Did you want to take a moment here to point to some of the things you got coming up?
Sure. I mean, the biggest thing going on for me right now is this workshop series that I'm doing throughout the spring and summer. There's maybe even some happening that aren't listed here yet, but the first one that's most pressing is if you're in the greater Toronto area, from, you know, all the way from Waterloo to Montreal, if you will, Niagara Falls even. You know, April 7th, I'm doing my strategy workshop there. Then as part of the Enterprise UX Conference, I'll be in San Francisco for that in June. And then I just happened to be taking a trip to the British Isles and Ireland. And so I set up 2 workshops there, one in Dublin and one in Brighton, UK. All of these are on sale, and you can see all the information at that bit.ly address on the bottom. For people who want to follow my reading, there's the medium.com address right there. Whenever I post something, it gets sent to the DesOps Twitter account. So if you just want that and not all of me, you can see stuff there. Otherwise, that is it, except to say, if you want me to consult, coach, or otherwise be available for you and your team in some kind of capacity, please don't be afraid to hit me up at that email address that's listed there. I'd love to help you and your organization get the value you want out of your team. So.
Great, thanks for that. Let's jump into some of the questions we had from Jose. He's talking about when you mentioned elevating design to a peer level of product and engineering. What are the challenges and obstacles that you see in achieving a peer level status?
I think it all comes down to that value statement. That if the fact that you don't have that peer level is probably like that first flag that tells me that your organization doesn't have an aligned view of the value of design. And quite honestly, like in the organizations that I've worked for, the value of design has just never even been asked, right? Like the closest that I've seen it come in the enterprises I've worked at is like capacity planning. How many hours of work are they doing, at what velocity, and do we feel confident that they're doing their job? And that has nothing to do with the value of design. That has to do with, are you delivering what development needs you to deliver? And it's more like, are you a cog in the machine, as opposed to, are you really providing value to the organization itself? And I think that those are 2 really different questions. And until you start answering that question, it's going to be hard for you to get to the point where you're going to get a peer in the organization.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you brought up the idea of the value of design at the beginning of your presentation, that kind of struck me as an interesting starting point for this, conversation then around DesignOps tools and things like that. And there are organizations that are on different, levels on the design maturity scale.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked for, or, been involved with, consulted with organizations that are high, but also some things that are, organizations that are very low on that scale. And design is just an extension of engineering. The designers are there so that the engineers can get through their stories faster because somebody else is taking care of the UI. And can you just talk about that a little bit more? It's like, if your organization is lower on the maturity scale, where do you even then begin?
Well, I think like the starting point that you need to start small. Of course, that's what I meant by starting with a bay. And there's a few ways to look at that. I think one is answer for yourself, what's the smallest thing that I can do to show strategic value? And by strategic value, I mean something other than creating an artifact that somebody else is going to consume. How am I going to create something that no one else in the organization could pretend to do, right? Like that would set us apart as a design organization. The way that I've seen this done, quite honestly, is through facilitation. By taking on the role of facilitating within your organization, it automatically sets you apart as not a person behind a screen. Owning the marker within a workshop of like owning a design sprint, for example, just sets you up to be understood in a completely different way. And it doesn't require any budget. It automatically just sets you up to be in front and showing how your ability to be visual, to synthesize things quickly, can make such a difference in a really short chunk of time in front of a group of people.
Yeah, a design sprint is something very tangible, something you can grab onto. What would be another example of something like that that someone could latch onto, grab onto as that marker, that strategic value marker? Do you have any other examples?
Yeah, actually, one that I'm going to be presenting tomorrow is an example of leading vision. So sometimes, as much as I'm all for work-life balance, sometimes you need to do the extra work, the work that's not assigned to you in Jira or not part of your billable hours. Sometimes you need to like do a little, the 10 or 20% over the 100% of your work to get by. And so the example that I have is when I was at Intralinks, really trying to influence a sales-oriented organization that thought that they were also the subject matter experts. I really went through and had to create proof of concepts that demonstrated to them my understanding of things that they weren't listening to. And by creating those visual assets and creating that story with those visual assets, I was able to open their eyes, open their mind, open their ears, and actually open their wallets. And actually, probably the most important thing was opening their trust. By doing that, showing that possible future that they weren't even imagining yet, right? And when I say like, overtime, whatever, I probably put in 5 hours in 1 week. At the time, it was when I was using Visio and I had all of the stencils just dragging and dropping, whatever your tool is, it doesn't take as much time as you think. But you have to make the effort and you have to be thinking about things in this way. So I think the hardest part is like keeping track of your thoughts and your inspirations. So having like a wall, both physical or virtual, is really helpful for keeping track of thoughts, so that when you do have that half an hour to 2 hours that you think you can plop down and grab, you aren't starting from scratch. Like you've been processing passively all this time. So you aren't just doing it all at once.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you threw in the virtual wall there too. Thanks for that, Dave. But it is an accretion of trust, right? You don't just gain trust. It's not an on and off switch, right? You have to kind of build it up, and you need to build up your own thoughts as well too. But I have a really good question from Jen that I wanted to throw out at you. At what point do you realize there's no way that you as a designer can succeed? That you're not going to change the organization, at least not with the resources and time and culture that you have. Have you ever come across that situation?
My laughter should imply yes. I think I used to do this talk about what is enterprise UX, and my dream of like walking in during that talk was to like come in with a big helmet on, because I do think like you need to like pad up and be ready to bang your head against a wall often. I have had at different points in my career what I will call too low tolerance to that. And so you may be asking the wrong person, because I tend to, quite honestly, until recently, have been like very opportunistic. And so when things start getting hard someplace, I might be giving up too soon. And let me explain why I know it's too soon. My great example is that I left Motorola Solutions at one point, right before a release. And the release was done, like my part was done, it was in the bag, but I was trying to build not a design organization, but specifically an interaction design practice. And I gave up, and because of a lot of story that's not important, but because I didn't see through the impact of the product that I just released, I missed my greatest opportunity. And what happened was, within a year and a half after I left, we went from a team of 1 or 2 to a team of 11 after I left. right? That I was part of the spark. It wasn't only what I did, it was a lot of other things, but the spark that enabled the conversation to change. So, to Jen's question, I don't have an answer for like, when do you know to leave? I would suggest you'd be surprised for yourself how leaving may be the wrong thing if you do it too soon. And so pad up. That's my advice on that one.
Yeah.
Your happiness is what matters. Like if you are just pulling your hair out every day and you wake up in the morning and you just can't see yourself going to work anymore, then you need to leave because it's just not healthy for you.
Yeah, I think there is some personal tolerance in there as well too. And our friend Anders Ramsey, who I don't know if is close to you right now, he used to work in the office there, but he once told me, if you can't change the organization, change organizations. And his tolerance was really low. But I personally, I tend to disagree with that. When I worked in large organizations, I always thought that was the challenge of design, was to change. If we just keep quitting and going to another organization, then those organizations are never going to change. Isn't that part of the challenge of design?
Exactly.
Changing in a big organization. And so I don't think there's any line that you can put in the sand. It's your own personal tolerance and how thick your helmet is and your pads, right?
Yeah.
But here, Jen has a really tough follow-up question. Is there any shame in giving up and saying, I can't change this organization?
I don't think shame is the right word. Regret, for me, answering it personally. I don't think there's any shame. There's a couple things. You may not be the right person.
Right.
Is another part of it, right? Like we all have strengths and weaknesses, and when you apply those strengths and weaknesses to the personality of the culture of that organization, you may not have the right compatibility. And I would say that was a lot of what I was facing at my time at Rackspace. It's another kind of situation where I did do a lot of change and a lot happened, but at the same time, I was only going so far. And I think that a lot of that was because of my personality, where I think in the other case at Motorola, it wasn't. But I think like sometimes there's just an incompatibility between you and the culture of the organization or of your team.
All right, great. I'm going to move over to Amanda's question and then get back to Astrid's question. But Amanda says, can you give us a good example of a good design value statement? So you talked about defining value of design. What does that actually look like?
What does a value statement look like? So I have one, but I'm going to need to bring it up.
That's okay. We don't mind if you flicker the screen or do what you need to do. There you go. A little backstage peek here.
Yeah, now I have to just find it. So wrong deck.
Okay.
Nope. All right, it's going to take me too long to do it. While I was at, I'm going to try and ad-lib it. But it was the value statement that we came up with in my HPE Helion team. So if any of them are on, maybe they can find it and tweet it or put it in. Of course, we're going to find out they're not here. But what we said was our role was to bring clarity and understanding between the people within and about the Helion system. And so like we picked on that one piece of the four, I think, that I listed around clarity and understanding and to create understanding. not just to bring it, not just to align it or whatever, but to create it. And so that I would say was our big value statement. But I'm gonna keep looking while people ask another question.
Yeah, let's shift a little bit to tools. And I know you talked a little bit about tools, but Astrid was speaking of if you have asking if you have any preferred design tools for your team.
Do I have any preferred design tools for my team? I'm anachronistic. I still like fireworks. I will not, you cannot take it from my dead hands. I do find that's a useless statement. So what I think is more useful is, tools, it really depends on like what segment of tools are you talking about, right? And often what I find is, especially because I'm usually more in a leadership role than in a maker role, and I'm adaptable to most any tools because of my experience in just learning tools a lot, that I let my team lead the tool conversation. And so unless it's tools that like are front and center, so like Slack is a really important tool to me. It's become important not just because of the company I work for or with, but because it's all of my communities are in that single tool as well. And those are all resources that help me. So that's one that I usually are like, we're going to use Slack or like, I'm going to be having a problem. Mm-hmm. I think another tool that's important for us to have an agreement about what we're doing with. And so I do more than just let the team decide, but like I try to be collaborative as possible, is really around what are we going to be doing with file sharing. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that, in the time of working in 2 jobs within 4 years, I had Google Drive, Dropbox, Box, and OneDrive, all thrown at me. So I feel like I've gotten to use all of them pretty in-depthly, and they all kind of don't do enough. And so it's really hard to center on one. So for example, I love Google Apps. And if I was to use Google Apps and only Google Apps in my organization, I would say Drive is the only tool that I would ever want to use. But it's really not that great for sharing files. And so if I need to share files, I don't find it nearly as enjoyable to use. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on what's the core flow and what's the context within that.
But who really decides on that? Because I've worked at companies like my last company, for instance, and I had 5 different ways that I could chat with somebody depending on the person and what team they were in. All the devs were using HipChat, but my team was using AIM, and then we had the Microsoft thing that came down from the top down, and then we used Google Chat for some of the other things as well too. Yeah. So none of that was my decision or even my team's decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's where it's really important to be collaborative and create those relationships. And it can work against you because things change within large organizations. So like at HPE, we had permission in our little unit of Helion to use Google Drive and Google Apps, and it was all procurement, secure ready, IT blessed and everything with single sign-on and all of those things that we needed. However, there was some reorg that occurred. I think a part of the company was sold off, and that part of the company owned the license agreement with Google, and so then we lost all of our Google access. Mm. Like, it wasn't overnight, like we were given warnings and whatnot, but it was still traumatic for us to have to like switch from Google Drive to SharePoint OneDrive. And so it is hard in bigger organizations, especially. If you're in an organization of hundreds of people, anything under 1,000, you should be able to, collaborate on the decisions. I think though you need to create the heuristics by which to make decisions with. And few organizations take the time to say,
Right.
these are the things that we need accomplished.
Right.
In doing that. And I think IT personnel actually have those business analysts who use those, and we need to work with them
Right.
in order to do that. But we need to know to do it.
Great. Scott's asking a question too about knowledge management. I know you talked about file sharing, and of course tools like Mural have a knowledge management component. But beyond just getting design done within a design team and then sharing that out, what about general knowledge management and that kind of function within DesignOps?
Yeah, so I have a love-hate relationship with wikis. I find that wikis are where knowledge goes to die, but they're just so easy to use. So I think that like there's people who tend to use wikis or SharePoint, things like that. Notion is a new tool that's really interesting. I do think though that tools that are based on question answer, like I've even seen hacks of tools like Get Satisfaction being brought internally to become the knowledge centers, as well as community-based knowledge, even internal community for stuff. I was actually thinking to myself this week that while pinning conversations in Slack is almost a way of like, creating knowledge within a Slack channel, because you can just use the pinned view. It needs something more. And I've seen some attempts of some side tools to work with Slack to do that, but nothing that I found successful. So if you are entrepreneurial minded, I think that there's definitely something to be done within that space. But I think capturing knowledge in such a way where people know it's there, know how to get it, is key, and engage with it so that it's living is the other issues. And I haven't really seen anything that I've seen live successfully for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm. One more topic that I wanted to bring up, that you talked about remote collaboration. And I just wanted to just double click on that for the last couple of minutes here, get your thoughts about remote collaboration. And I think in your presentation, you were kind of suggesting to prepare or always think as if you're going to be remote, because you will be at one point in time, right? Is that kind of what you were saying there?
Yep. Hopefully you will be, because get out of the building is one of the main principles of any good design team. So get out of the building.
So what can you say more about that though? Like what do you do? Is that a mindset thing? Is that a tool thing? What can you do to prepare yourself for always being remote?
Well, I think that it's a mindset thing first and foremost. I know that when I was at Rackspace, we had a really interesting formulation of our design team, forget about anybody else, where we had I'd say 40% of the team in one office and another 40% of the team in another office. Those two offices were an hour and a half from each other, barring I-35 traffic, and San Antonio and Austin. And but we were in different offices, but we could visit each other really easily. There was even a shuttle that we had. But then there were team members who were in either satellite offices or work from home, and they were sort of more like one or two offs. And we actively made a decision at one point and said, all meetings are remote meetings. No one goes to a conference room. You all sit at your desk. Mm-hmm. And so that you're isolated, so that everyone is sort of the same. From being in that remote perspective for those kinds of meetings. And it was weird at first, because like you would turn around and you'd say like tap to so-and-so and say you're on mute and stuff like that, right? But like you on the one hand, and on the other hand, my take of it, being a person who is either working at home or in one of those two major offices, was that things improved in terms of the remote engagement, and that any time where we broke the rule because we weren't in charge of the meeting, or we felt we were including people in the meeting who didn't have that mindset, I felt like things fell apart. Now, you do still need conference rooms. You still need to have co-located spaces for real-time stuff, face-to-face stuff, but especially for those regular type meetings of whether it's a Scrum meeting or a similar type team meeting, it's really important to treat those, especially those regular activities, as if everybody's remote. Makes a big difference. And it's just one example of the mindset stuff.
Yeah, great. Lots of topics here to chew on, Dave. I want to thank you for coming by and working with us. It's always great and just fascinating to hear what you have to say about this and other topics. We'll be looking out for you out on the road there, out on the internet. I know you're an active contributor to Medium and Twitter and things like that. So thanks. If anybody has a question or wants to get in touch with Dave, there's the information right there. Follow him on Twitter. Check out his Medium post. I also just tweeted a link to an interview that Dave and I did about a month ago in preparation for this webinar. A lot more detail on DesignOps there. But with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. We're going to make the recording of this available on our blog. That's blog.mural.co. We'll have a little summary and a link to the recording. That usually takes a couple days for us to get up there. But you can check back and point your colleagues who missed this session, you can point them to the recording afterwards. So once again, thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And with that, we will end the session. Bye-bye.